everyone, my name is Trisha Mehta and today we will be interviewing Ms. Roshni Shanker, who is the founder of Migration and Asylum Project, which is also called MAP. Thank you, Roshni, for being with us today.
Thank you, Trisha. My pleasure.
So before we dive into the interview, let me give you all a brief introduction about Roshni. Ms. Roshni Shanker is the founder and executive director of the Migration and Asylum Project, which was formerly known as ARA Legal Initiative. This is India's first and only dedicated law center for forced migration and displacement. After completing her law degree, Roshni worked with one of India's leading law firms as a corporate lawyer. She later pursued a master's from Columbia Law School, NYC, with a focus on international law and human rights. She joined UNHCR in 2010 and worked as a refugee status determination expert in various field offices, including India, Egypt, and the UAE. Realizing that traditional humanitarian interventions often fail to recognize the centrality of legal assistance to post-displacement recovery and believing these gaps to be best addressed by grassroots organizations familiar with the local context, Roshni returned to India to set up MAP. MAP pioneered and institutionalized the concept of legal representation in the asylum process in India and is one of the few organizations globally to have been authorized by UNHCR to represent asylum claims before the agency. Roshni was also a visiting faculty member at the National Law School of India University, where she taught international refugee law. She has also published in the Forced Migration Review, Refugee Law Initiative, and the International Journal of Refugee Law, amongst many others. Well, before we delve into the specifics of the project, Roshni, could you provide us with some background on what motivated you to leave the UN and initiate this endeavor in India?
Thank you so much, Trisha. That is a very long and detailed introduction. I think just to sort of give you a little bit of background about the time that all of this was happening. Okay, so this was between like late 2009-10. And I had just finished a stint as a corporate lawyer for 3 years in Mumbai. Then I'd done my master's in international law. And then I joined the UN, as you said. I think what motivated me was the fact that I was initially very enamored by the UN. And I felt that was my end goal. I wanted to do international law and I wanted to work in the UN. And the option in front of me was to start bottoms at the bottom and then keep sort of climbing that ladder. However, after working there for about 3 years, I think I started really enjoying the work that I was doing, which was providing direct, legal assistance to refugees. So my job was actually not even providing assistance. My job was actually assessing asylum claims. So I was a decision maker, and my job was to listen to stories of asylum. So people coming from, very conflict-ridden countries like Afghanistan, Somalia, etc. Listen to their stories and decide whether they fit within the international law definition of who should be a refugee. And while all of this sounds, straightforward and perhaps a little technical, I think just describing it like this doesn't sort of communicate the magnitude of the decisions that we were making, right? Because this is if I was ill prepared on a particular day or I didn't understand the context in that particular country and I rejected a particular case, that meant that they would be deported to a country which was facing war. They were at the risk of being persecuted, death, indefinite detention, etc. So I think in my 20s, I felt that I was quite ill-equipped to be taking decisions which were deciding the fate of a person's, right to live in a safe environment. And at that time, the UN had these policies in place which allowed legal representation in the process so that the person making an asylum claim is a bit more prepared. They understand the process. They know how to make an effective claim. But it hadn't really taken off. It was the policy was there in paper, but I didn't see too many lawyers doing this work. And I felt now that I've been trained for 3 years and in different spheres, like I had worked in the corporate field, I'd studied it academically, and then I'd worked in the UN. I felt like these are the skills now I want to bring to the grassroots and start something of my own, which would give me the flexibility to design programs the way I wanted to engage with the community the way I wanted to, and use all these skills to serve the people who most need these services. Yeah.
So, like keeping in mind the diversity here and our legal system, what were the major legal challenges that you faced while you were establishing this project?
Right. I think one of the things straight off the bat is the fact that Indian law doesn't recognize the term refugees, right? So the whole idea that you're setting up a legal aid center or a refugee law center when refugee law doesn't mean anything under Indian law is our first challenge. That being said, I think having worked in the space for that limited period of time, for about 3 years, I knew that India, despite not having signed the Refugee Convention or having laws which specifically defined who refugees were, was hosting close to 200,000 refugees within its borders. There were a number of Supreme Court judgments, High Court judgments recognizing the rights of refugees. We had also signed a number of other international conventions like CEDAW, CRC, etc., which recognize the rights of an asylum seeker, if that asylum seeker is a child or the asylum seeker is a woman, etc. And so we have a refugee law framework, but it is far more complicated. It's more complex because you have to look at different provisions to build that protection. So I think that is what also excited me, because this was not something straightforward that you had a law and you could just apply it directly. You had to keep thinking. That is one aspect. The second aspect is also the political context. It keeps changing. The geopolitical interests of how India engages with certain countries and how they look at refugees from, say, in Afghanistan versus a refugee coming from Somalia or Syria is vastly different. And so you have to be on your toes. You have to understand these contexts, and you need to know how to process these claims, how to assist them, how to engage with different institutions. We primarily provided legal representation before the UN, and the UN has a guideline for how to do that. So in that sense, that's hugely helpful because you have a framework to operate within. So we largely, our first program largely focused on that.
Okay. And can you also tell us the typical process or channels through which migrants can approach your organizations for assistance? Like,
Right,
I believe I was going through your website and you've also developed an app for this.
right,
Yeah. Could
right,
you
right.
throw some light on this,
Sure.
please?
Sure. So in the initial years when MAP was established, we primarily worked with the UN registered refugees because, like I said, there was a framework for legal representation in that process. So what we essentially did was that they would contact us as the first point of contact. They would come to our office. They don't know the language. They're often already facing a lot of trauma because they've just come from a conflict-ridden country. And we would sort of prepare them for this interview. We'll tell them the process. We'll tell them firstly, what the UNHCR is, what is the process, what kind of documentations they can get. And once they get the documentation, what are the Indian laws that are applicable to them? What are their rights? What are their responsibilities, etc. So in that sense, we become like, we handhold them throughout that entire asylum process. Now, the way we sort of reach out to the community is initially it is by word of mouth because we were a small team. We were, I think, only in the beginning, there were only 2 lawyers. And even now, the team is not very large. The team which handles refugee casework is about, I think, 5 to 6 lawyers. And so we sort of the work that we do is just sort of communicated through interpreters, refugee interpreters, through UNHCR themselves. Sometimes they refer some cases. So we don't have a very strong, communication channel to do outreach with the community. There are not too many service providers in the space, so I think the word gets around quite easily. In terms of then the pandemic happened in 2020, and then we realized that a lot of we couldn't wait for the refugees to come to us, so we had to go into the settlements and start doing legal aid desks, etc., to identify what their vulnerability was and try and connect them to services. And when we went into the settlements, we realized that there were also migrant workers who were Indian migrant workers. And that was like 90% of the community in those settlements. And it just seemed wrong that you are here providing legal services, but to a particular group, but not to the larger group, which pretty much has the same requirements. They don't have documentation, they can't access government services, all the problems that come with undocumented migration. And so then we realized that, okay, we need to expand the scope of our services. And we started setting up legal desks in different communities. So we work with Indian migrants, internal migrants, as we call it, who move from one state to the other. And these desks happen once a week, or depending on the frequency, like our capacity also, we do it in different settlements. We operate out of community spaces. We operate out of a community leader's house, Asha Anganwadi centers, if there is space available to reach the women. And today, I think the way we operate is that it's a legal aid center. It's open to everybody. I think our only requirement is that you need to have been impacted by migration of some kind, internal or across border. And you need to not have the resources to be able to access legal protection. So I think that is our criteria. We have an app, like you said, where we have digitized all the legal services as service providers. We have digitized a database of people who provide a range of other services. So that could be with education, health, etc. So the idea was that we are not the only ones who can provide this service, and we don't have the capacity. So you need to also connect people to different service providers. And I think we have about 300 plus people listed on that. So that will include very hyper-local grassroots service providers. So it will include Asha Anganwadi workers, it will be paralegal volunteers, etc. So we've mapped it across, I think, 6 to 8 settlements, and we've provided the service, the service providers in that region have been mapped, and we provided that in the app. But I think that's still work in progress, and we still need to build that and cover the whole city at least. Yeah.
And are you also in collaboration with some government agencies which help you in making it easier, basically to make it easier for you to, go through the whole process?
So we engage with the legal aid services authorities because I think our work is primarily legal empowerment and legal awareness. So where possible, we engage with them to conduct these sessions. But most of our work is with the UN and with the legal aid service authorities. We are state, labor commissioners, etc. But we don't, as of now, we don't have a collaboration with, say, a ministry which is funding us to do this work, etc. Because we also see ourselves as a civil society organization which is independent of that. So we want to supplement the work that the government is already doing or other service providers are doing.
Okay. So Roshni, while you were going through your website, there was this term which was used. You called some people barefoot advocates.
Yeah.
Like MAP identifies members within displaced population to act as barefoot advocates. Could you throw some light on what this means and what is their role?
Right. I think barefoot advocates is just a fancy term for community workers. And I think it's an internationally used term. And I've seen it in many of the UN reports, etc. But actually, I think, yeah, it just means somebody who's within the community. So in the Indian context, an ASHA worker would be a barefoot advocate. A paralegal volunteer registered with a legal aid services authority would be a barefoot advocate. Or it would be a community representative who's a community spirited person who we've trained to sort of provide the first line of information, connect them to service providers like us. So, and we find that that is a big program for us, actually, training barefoot advocates, because we realize our limitations. And we also want to do the work which can't be done by everybody. So we want to focus more on the litigation aspect of the work that we're doing, or coming up with legal strategies, doing legal advocacy, etc. But going and doing door-to-door campaigns, running legal aid desks, connecting people to government schemes, getting them documentation registrations, are all things which we very strongly believe can be done by the barefoot advocates. And so we run a program where we conduct like 3 to 6 months of trainings for a batch of barefoot advocates. So that would be like a paralegal volunteer batch or Asha Anganwadi workers, etc. And then we would equip them to provide the first line of assistance. But everything that we do is in the space of access to justice. So the training that we provide is, for example, on laws pertaining to sexual and gender-based violence. It would be on laws pertaining to child protection, laws pertaining to labor rights, etc.
So how does your project prioritize the needs of these vulnerable groups, basically focusing on women, children, LGBTQ? How does your project prioritize that?
So we have an internal case management system in which we track vulnerabilities. So we would first do an intake. When we go to the community, we will do a 20-minute interview, which is an intake interview, to understand like what is this case about, what is the economic means of the person, like an overall like sort of profile assessment, and understand what is their immediate protection need. So obviously, if it is a survivor of sexual and gender-based violence, their immediate need might be medical. Or they might have already gone through that and now they want to go file a report at the police station, for example. So then, depending on the urgency of the matter, we prioritize what services we need to give. So if it is just legal counseling, it's a case where they just want to understand what rights they have, etc. Then obviously that is not a priority case. But if somebody wants to go to the police station and file a case, then we would probably appoint a paralegal volunteer who's been trained by us on the case so that they can do the follow-ups, and then we take that forward. So I think we don't have a specific structure for what to prioritize, what not to prioritize. I think it's on the field we take that judgment call.
Okay. So Roshni, can you share any memorable experiences or encounters you've had while you were setting up the project, or while this project is ongoing? Any experiences you want to share with us?
I think there are just so many experiences, right? Like we just recently finished our 10 years, 2023, we finished 10 years of the organization. And I know there are lots of specific client stories, which I could share and we could keep talking about it all day. But I think for me, that 10 years was a very, very special milestone because it's often when you are a founder and you're running multiple programs, you don't have time to take a break and reflect on how far you've come. And today, even now, when on the 10th anniversary, when I had to sort of do the welcome address, I think it makes you realize that you started something called a refugee law center. You start working in that space, which doesn't even exist under law. And obviously, a lot of people were very surprised by the decision of wanting to do something like this because it's a fairly niche area. Not too many people understood what it is. Only my colleagues in the UN knew what I was doing. In that sense, not even members of my family understood it. To coming 10 years where you have a team now of close to 30 people who are doing this work. You have donors who are committed to the work that you're doing, and are willing to support you. I think for me that was a very, very special memory, honestly. And I think we celebrated that event with a lot of community clients, community members and clients who came and performed. We had all our supporters over the years who came together under one roof. So for me that was a very, very special memory. And like I said, there are so many others with client-specific ones. I think our first client, I mean, this is a story I've told my team pretty often, but it was a client, I think, from Sudan, and his claim before the UNHCR had been rejected so many times. I think he spent 20 years trying to get recognized as a refugee. But it kept getting rejected because he was never able to articulate where he came from or why he was facing persecution in his country. And he became our first client when we started the Refugee Law Center. And it was just one of those serendipitous things because I had worked in Egypt where I had processed a number of Sudanese cases. So I knew which region he had come from, what tribe he was from, and the risk that he was facing. And I wouldn't have known this if the case had gone, if he'd come to me 2 years ago. It was just one of those timing things. And we were able to make that case, like submit the documents, go to the UN, engage. And after 20 years, the man got recognized as a refugee. And that became also a way for us to convince the UN that, okay, this is why you need us, because there will be cases like this which will fall through the cracks. And I'll never forget the fact that he kept that refugee card, he framed it, and he would always carry it with him around his neck. And a number of times he's come to our office and like thanked us for that. And for you and me, that's such a small thing, right? It's just an ID card. And I think it makes you realize like how much more that is for somebody who doesn't have any form of identity. So I think, yeah, that case will always be very special to me.
That's amazing, actually.
Mm.
And I think your work exposure at the UN also must have really, really helped you in, helping people from different countries, different borders, right?
Yep. Yep. Yeah.
So, yeah, Roshni was saying something.
No, I think definitely. I think that is what excited me the most about the work, which is that you get to, when I first joined the UN, the idea was that I liked international law and I had to find a way to make a living out of that. Okay, because I wanted to practice international law and I didn't know how to do that. And I'm also from, like I said, I graduated in 2005, and that time you had to do a bunch of things before you could figure out what you really wanted to do. But today, people are very specialized as soon as they graduate from college because you have very clear pathways of what you could do. And I think the UN for me was a very obvious thing. I thought once I go there, I will, that my career trajectory will start. But I think what I really, like I said, felt very, very passionate about was exactly what you're saying, is the fact that you meet people from different regions and you're actually able to use law. You're not just talking like theoretical or like esoteric things. You're actually using the law to tangibly help somebody. And I think I just wanted to continue doing that irrespective of which institution I'm in. I just wanted to do that work. And at the UN, after a point, I felt, okay, you can't, because it's again a larger institution, there are lots of protocols and systems, etc., and there is there are different roles and responsibilities. So I felt I wanted to step away from that and do something where I could be innovative without any sort of institutional baggage. Yeah.
And you also felt that a grassroots organization will be able to
Yeah,
help you in a country. So you came back and
absolutely.
started on the work here.
Absolutely. And the time that I started the organization, there was, it was very true, the fact that, see, the UN can do certain things, but civil society organization often had more access to engagements with the government. For example, even filing an RTI, as an Indian citizen, we can do that. So I felt at that time, civil society organizations had spaces where they could do things which, say, a UN agency couldn't do. So in that sense, it was a good complementarity also. Obviously, what the UN can do, a civil society, grassroots organizations cannot do. But I think my priority was that the services that we provide have to directly reach, the person who's most vulnerable. And that we were able to do better because we were operating from within near the settlements. We had access to the community. They had access to us. So I think, yes, that was, I think that was always the model we had in mind.
Okay. And so I feel after listening to your inspiring story, I feel some of our viewers would want to join MAP. So if they do, then how do they, how do they get in touch with you? And do they have to undergo any training to start working with MAP? How does it work?
Sure. So we essentially, if you look at our website, that is always a good place to start because we do keep that updated. It explains what our theory of change is, how we use the law to ensure impact. We have 4 programs right now. One is, like I said, the UNHCR Legal Representation Program, which is our oldest running program. That was the first program that we started. Then after that began the sexual and gender-based violence program. That is for both refugee women and for migrant women. I think we just look at women who are facing this issue. What kind of legal protections can we extend to this community? The third is a migrant worker project, which is more on labor rights. And again, this is post-COVID that we had launched this program because there was a tremendous need for that kind of service. And we have small, like a livelihood project, which is for Afghan women who do handicraft work, and they're trained to do this by a partner organization. And they set up like a handicraft center, but it's a very, very, very small project that we done. So I would urge everybody to take a look at that and see which program sort of interests them. We run something called the Catalyst for Change CFC Fellowship, which is for young law graduates. And I think that is a good entry point to the organizations. It's a 2-year program, 1 year plus 1 year. So if you want to extend it by another year, then yeah. So that sort of gives you a good exposure to the different work that we do, the different programs that MAP runs. Of course, if we do a lateral hire, we usually look for people who have the relevant experience for that particular program. So if you're applying for the sexual and gender-based violence program, we would want somebody with more litigation experience who has worked on gender rights before. If you want to apply for the UNHCR legal representation work, then we would look for somebody who has, a background in migration or refugee protection, etc. So that we do on a case-by-case basis. But for the Catalyst for Change Fellowship, we don't require you to have any prior experience. We just want somebody who's really committed to this space and is willing to put in those like 1 or 2 years with us.
Well, thank you so much, Roshni, for your time and for shedding light on the intricacies of establishing migration asylum projects in India. Well, your expertise and insights have provided our audience with great understanding of the challenges that these migrants face. And I'm sure this interview will inspire many individuals to join the cause and contribute to the efforts in supporting migrants and refugees in India. Thank you
Thank
so
you so much.
much for being a part of this.
Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you.